as Chantel said, I am a graduate of UD. I majored in psychology, minored in history and American studies, which I don't think they even have anymore, but that's okay. I went on to get a master's degree from Widener because at that point, UD did not have anything remotely resembling a human resources degree. So I went up the road to Widener, got a master's. I started my career in retail. So I was a retail HR manager. So I worked for the Borders bookstore chain. And I was the plant facilities and HR manager there for about 9 years. And then I left there because the writing was on the wall that the chain was probably going to close, and it did within a few years of me leaving. So I went over to what was MBNA at the time in Newark, and I actually worked in our call centers. So I was a fraud analyst. I did collections for a while. I did some additional fraud, and then I moved into a assistant recruiter role and then a recruiter role. And I've been doing recruiting for what is now Bank of America for about 15, 16 years. I've recruited just about every job you can think of at the bank. So everything from tellers and financial center people to call center representatives, mid-level management, finance, accounting, mortgage, every product you can think of, and they keep finding new ones for me. So for the first time, I'm working in the global payments and sanctions division. So we're doing the Office of Foreign Assets Control and international sanctions. So that's something new for me. So that's me. That's where I come from, what I've done. So, because there's just a few of us, definitely ask questions at any point if you have any, if there's anything you want me to clarify. But I'm coming from the point of view of a business, big business corporation level. So that's where most of my experience has been. Borders was a little smaller, but it was still part of a large corporation. So this is kind of my mindset. But most of what I'm going to tell you would apply to any business. So the first step in the selection process for any business, large ones in particular, is the resume review. So you submit your application with your resume, and then it has to be reviewed. So the first human to look at your resume will always be the recruiter. So the recruiter's going to look at it first. Now, some companies do use software. I'm sure you've heard of this, where the software will scan your resume and it will look for certain keywords. My company, as big as we are, hundreds of thousands of employees, we actually don't use it. We don't feel that it catches everything it needs to. It's just not nuanced enough. Maybe someday it will catch up to real life, but we just don't feel it's there. It can't read between the lines. So we feel the software excludes too many people. So that's why we use recruiters. So we are the first ones to look at your application. Sometimes after software's been used, in my case, there's no software, so I'm the first look at it. And you have to bear in mind, even if the software has been used to screen, recruiters are still going to have anywhere from hundreds to thousands of resumes to look at any given time. It depends on what kind of hiring you're doing, but hundreds and hundreds, not unusual at all. I've had well over 1,000 at some points. IT recruiters can run into the 3,000s. So you just have to bear in mind what we're doing is we are looking at tons of them. And because of that, we're only going to spend a couple seconds on the first review. We just can't afford any additional time. So you have to basically sell your skills and yourself in those first couple of seconds we see it. And we'll talk about how to get your resume noticed in those couple of seconds. But we do look for keywords and phrases in that first scan. So those first couple of seconds, that's exactly what we're looking for, are keywords and phrases. And because we have such limited time, we do stay on the first page during that first scan. So you want to make sure all of the good stuff, so to speak, that's going to sell you to us is on that first page. So how do you stand out? Because we only have those couple of seconds and I have thousands to look at. So if Chantel told me you can only give everybody one tip, what would it be? My tip would be, make sure you tweak your resume for every new job you apply to, every single time. So often we get resumes that obviously haven't been buffed or adjusted or tweaked to match the position the person's applying for. So essentially we're getting a generic resume, and that's not going to sell you. So you want to make sure each time you apply to a position, you sit down and look at the resume, pull things out, put new things in, adjust the language, whatever you need to do to make it match what that hiring manager is looking for as closely as possible. So you want to read the job description, read the required skills, read the required experience very carefully in that job you're going to apply for, and make sure you are basically parroting back some of those keywords and phrases, because that's what I'm going to be scanning for. Another thing, and I have a visual of this, we'll look at it in a second, but another thing to consider to help your resume pop in those first couple of seconds is including a list or table of skills near the top, so you can quickly showcase a lot of skills and ability all at once in an easy to read format that my eye will pick up on quickly. And we'll look at that in a second. Another very important thing is to make sure your objective statement actually matches the position. Even amongst college graduates, very intelligent people, we get so many resumes where the person forgot to tweak their resume. So the objective says that they're looking for a position that has nothing to do with the actual job they're applying to. So, you know, when we see that, we realize, A, you're probably not interested in the position that we're actually hiring for, and B, you don't have good attention to detail. So just make sure it matches. And another thing that may seem trivial is if you're not comfortable putting your address on your resume, that's perfectly fine. But at least include the city and state where you live, or where you go to school, or where you intend to be located, something like that. So we have an idea if you're actually in the right location. A lot of our roles are very specific. So for instance, we can only hire in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you live in Charlotte, you'd want to make sure it says Charlotte, North Carolina. If you don't, you can put Newark, Delaware, and then comma, willing to relocate. And then we know that we should go forward and continue to consider you, that you're willing to move to that place. Because recruiters, we're not going to waste our time with someone who's not in the right location. So let's look at an example. So this is an example of a job at Acme Company. So the job is Accounting Analyst 1, and we have our job description there. So performing reconciliation accounting work, investor division, GL reconciliation, et cetera, et cetera. Requirements are listed there: accounting experience, reconciliation, general ledger, Excel skills, including VLOOKUPs, pivot tables, complex formulas, and basic SQL or SQL skills. So this is the job we're going to apply to. So the first thing you want to do is do the identification of the keywords. So I advise people, if you can, maybe print out a copy of the job description off the web, or sit with your notebook and list out some of these words. So, accounting, accountant, analyst, Excel, SQL, general ledger, GL, VLOOKUP, pivots, complex formulas, SQL script, queries, reports, reporting. So those are all words that you can either pull directly from the job description or you can infer from it. So that's step one. And then step two is actually getting it into the resume. So here's Robert. So Robert has his contact info at the top. You definitely want to include your contact phone number, contact email, and at least city and state and relo information if relevant. I know you have to put that in every time you apply, but once we get a hold of your resume, we tend to go to the resume to look for your contact information, so make sure that's always accurate. And then Robert has his objective to obtain accounting position, so it matches the job, which is good. And then you can see there, Robert included a little table of some of his skills. So this makes it really easy for somebody like me to see what he can do at the very first glance. I don't even have to read any further to know. He's got Excel, general ledger accounting, PowerPoint, SQL, reconciliation, financial statements, etc. So right there, as a recruiter, having reviewed the job description that I've been given, I probably wouldn't even read any further in my first screen. I would grab his resume and put it in the next step pile. So he's already made it past my initial screen right there without me even having to look any further. Now, I certainly will be looking further on my second and third, pass to narrow down my pile. But just to get into the working list I have, that would do it. But looking down, he does include some experience there. So in Robert's case, he hasn't worked yet for a company, but he has had experience academically. So he listed Accounting 101, a project he was on, and then some of the things that he did. So if you haven't had any practical experience, but you've got the academics, that's one way to show me that.
Hey, Kerry, Katie has a question in the chat. If you can go back to the objective statements really quickly. She wants to know, how long should the objective statement typically be?
Very short. You want to keep it short, sweet, to the point, and have it exactly match the job that you're applying to. Honestly, recruiters and hiring managers just speed right over that. It's nice. It's more tradition at this point than anything else. But honestly, we don't spend a lot of time looking at it because we just don't have the time. So definitely just short and sweet.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so coming back to that same thing. So I'm a student or recent graduate, and the job description is requiring work experience that I don't have yet. That's going to probably come up here and there. Or if you have some, you don't have a lot of it. So what do you do? So what I recommend to students is what we're actually looking for, even though it says must have 3 to 5 years experience doing this. It's not the experience really that the manager's looking for. It's can you do it? Because if you have experience, that tells them that you can do it. So what makes you be able to do it? It's your skill set. So you have to show that you have that skill set, whatever it might be. So you can illustrate you have the skill set in, different ways. As a student, one of the biggest ways is giving examples from class projects, classroom work, different presentations or different things you had to do for class. Those are perfectly relevant examples, especially when you're coming from a business degree type of background. You're going to probably have different examples you can provide, so provide a few of those. Other things, of course, you could try are, volunteer work. Like, for instance, if you belong to a sorority and you managed their finances or something like that, that's another example that you can throw out. But usually for students, it's going to be like class projects, or once you get to be a senior or even a grad student, research projects, papers that you co-author, things like that. That is usually your best bet because it shows that you do in fact have those skills, you have used them. It just hasn't been in a corporate setting. And the other thing I recommend for students, it becomes even more important for students because you don't have that breadth of experience, we'll say, is to show you have the depth of it. So get very specific with your examples to show your level of proficiency. So, if you, for instance, have, learned in school how to do, some particular kind of accounting work, and you have a project that you were on and you're going to use that as an example of your skills, be very specific. That way, if the manager is wondering, well, okay, so I see this project, but did he really do X, Y, and Z? If you call that out, then there's no need for them to wonder. They know you can do X and Y and Z. You can do transforms or VBA script or these fancy things, say within Excel, that they might be looking for. Another thing recent grads students run into is I only have some of the skills and experience listed in the job description, but I don't have all of them. So the first question might be, should I even apply? I would advise yes, still apply. Some things are the managers can do without, or they can teach if you have this instead. So I would still apply. Make sure you list, even if you only saw it maybe in a classroom setting, list in there and just say, I learned the principles of this. I learned the basics of that. I was exposed to this in, this class. And that way you're being honest, but at least they know you've seen it, you've learned about it. So list your classroom exposure, if you have any, for those skills that maybe you don't quote have, and absolutely add in any additional relevant skills or experience you do have. So in somebody who's been in the field for say 20 years or something, they will probably have so many skills and types of experience, they're going to have to cut their list back. So they're going to have to be judicious about what they put on their resume, or it'll be 10 pages long. Here, the opposite is true. So you may have to sit back and add a few things that maybe aren't listed in the job description, but that are relevant. So even in our accounting description, maybe it didn't say anything about managing large data sets. Well, maybe that's something you did in a statistical class. So, managing data is managing data. It may not be directly pertinent to the accounting position, but data is data. So I would list that on your resume, because you never know. A manager might see that and think, oh, so he does know how to do this, and we could pull these things together, and he might actually be a fit for this role, because there's always a much bigger picture behind the scenes as far as a position than what's actually just listed in the job description. And I can tell you from experience, the job descriptions at my company are, they're fairly limited, and they don't give a lot of detail. And that's on purpose, because our legal team has to help write them. And so they have to be, in a certain format, a certain way. So they certainly don't tell the whole story at all. So you never know what might attract a hiring manager or recruiter. So, add in some additional experience, even if you don't think it's 100% relevant. So these are some best practices and tips from myself and from other recruiters I've worked with over the years. And this is just in general, this goes for anyone. We don't recommend that you include a picture of yourself. I've seen that on resumes before, but we don't recommend it. And we definitely don't want you to put any personal information on a resume. Age, whether you have children or not, gender identity, race, etc. For one, it's not relevant. And two, you don't want to trigger any, say, prejudices a hiring manager might have that maybe they're not even aware of. Plus, all of that takes up valuable space on a resume. And when you remember that even when I do get to the point where I am actually reading your resume, I don't have time to read, 3-4 pages. So, it's just taking up valuable space. Keep your resume simple. So black font on a white background, use a font that's easy to read. Don't shrink it down and make it tiny. Try to avoid color, avoid any backgrounds, graphics, fancy borders, anything like that. A resume, especially in the business world, is not the forum to show your creativity, we'll say. It needs to be, an official document, essentially. So, black on white, plain, because it's the content that we're interested in. And when in doubt, go to the second page. There used to be an old-fashioned rule out there that your resume had to be 1 page. And that's just not the case anymore. 2 pages is fine. More than 2 is too long, but 2 pages is fine. So if you have to go on to the second page, we'd rather you do that than try to shrink everything down to some tiny font that's hard for us to see. Certainly use action verbs when you write it. Only be truthful. Don't exaggerate. Don't put something on there that's not true, because businesses do extensive background checks nowadays. We have to, and it will come out eventually. And unless you have a pressing reason, we definitely recommend the chronologic format to a resume. So you would be listing the positions in chronological order. So your newest or current position would be at the top, and then working backwards from there. And the other big thing is use bullet points for sure. Don't write paragraphs. When we have to go through a lot of resumes, and the managers, even if I get the pile down to just 2 or 3, they just don't have the time or the mental ability, basically, because they're so rushed and so pressed for time to sit and read paragraphs. So use bullet points. We definitely retain and see and capture more information when you bullet point than we do in paragraph style, like way more. So, to make sure that we're taking in the information, use your bullet points. So at the bottom, there's an example. So this person worked for Acme Company. There's his dates, title, fraud prevention intern, gave a brief description of what the job was. So you're just quickly telling the recruiter and the manager what you did. So we have a context. So in this case, this person reviewed credit card accounts for fraudulent activity, contacted customers and adjusted accounts to remove charges, and issued new cards. And then the bullet points are where you provide something about you that is going to set you apart from other candidates who maybe also did a fraud prevention internship. So this person was recognized for outstanding customer service. So that means they have good people skills, a good customer focus. They exceeded their goal of fraud transactions found by 13%. So that means they work hard, they're focused, they're efficient, and they were selected for additional training in ATM fraud due to excellent quality scores. So that means great attention to detail, again, focus on quality, etc. So when you're listing actual positions, that's kind of the format you want to use. You can also use that if you're giving an example of work done in a college course. So instead, it would be University of Delaware, Accounting 101. And then you would, briefly explain what the project was. And then the bullet points might be, impressive findings that you came up with, or, something like that. So some common mistakes we see day in and day out. First one is the resume just doesn't have any of the keywords, like the key skills, key experience, what we're looking for just isn't there. And if it's not written down, it didn't happen as far as we're concerned. So, make sure you're putting those keywords in there. Resumes that are too long, 3, 4, 5+ pages, or too short, like less than half a page. A sloppy appearance, there's different fonts, it's not connected, it's, things aren't indented, it just looks bad. No detail, so you didn't have any bullet points, you didn't explain what you did, how you did it, nothing in particular to showcase what you can do for us. Contact information is out of date, so we call the phone number on the resume and we get, your ex-girlfriend's mother or something. Very bad. So you want to make sure your contact info is completely up to date. Spelling, grammar, and punctuation errors are bad. That shows a poor attention to detail. Too much jargon. So it's a fine line you have to walk as far as jargon goes. The hiring manager will certainly expect to see some jargon, but you have to remember the recruiter does not have the background you do. So for instance, if we're hiring for an accounting position, we're not accountants. So other than the very basics, we're not going to know what you're talking about if you use a lot of jargons, acronyms, abbreviations. So you have to kind of balance it out. So anything beyond the basics, you probably want to spell those words out just to help the recruiter. And then passive tense all the time with no action verbs. So make sure you've got your action verbs in there. So cover letters. Cover letters should be brief, a couple of paragraphs. Again, Neither I nor the hiring managers have a lot of time to read, so they should definitely be brief. The cover letters are just another chance for you to sell your skills in a different way. So you want to use the letter to remind, reiterate, what your skills are, what you can bring to the table, why you're a great fit. The purpose of the cover letter is not to tell me why this is a good job for you, what you want out of it. It's a sales tool for you. So you should be using it to sell yourself to me. And then you want to proof them every bit as thoroughly as you would your resume. Now, I'll tell you, for my purposes, and I know this is common among at least a lot of the bigger companies, is we don't even read cover letters. They're kind of becoming a thing of the past. Now, smaller companies, I believe they still will use them, read them, maybe even require them. I know at my bank, we rarely even look at them. I know the managers don't even open the attachments. I rarely do. For us, it's all about the resume. So you want to put all your time and effort in the resume. The cover letter, maybe write a more generic one that's easy and quick for you to tweak between companies, and only put a lot of time into them if the company's requiring it. So just a couple things. When I was talking with my peers about doing this presentation, there were a few things that both they and actually a couple of hiring managers wanted me to share with you guys. So a couple things they've seen around interviews. Please, please, please turn off your cell phone and put it away, or don't even bring it in the room with you for the interview. Way too many times, students are so used to being connected to their phone, it's got your schedule on it, everything else, that you forget to turn it off, or you leave it sitting out in the interview. The managers don't want to see your cell phone anywhere during that interview, so just keep it out of sight. Dress professionally for every interview or meeting, teleconference, whatever it happens to be. The hiring manager said they've had several instances where their recent grad, came on site very professionally dressed for the in-person meeting. All went well. And then the manager needed to schedule a second, maybe teleconference meeting for later so that some other people could join to talk to the candidate, and the candidate appeared in a t-shirt. So just, take every meeting seriously, no matter how casual the format might seem to you, you still want to be professionally dressed. Always be prepared. So if you're on site, you want to bring multiple copies of your resume, transcripts, diploma, any other documents you think might be important. And when you attend any kind of teleconference interview or phone, you want to make sure right at your fingertips are PDF or Word versions of whatever documents are important. That way, if the manager's on the phone with you or in a Zoom call and says, oh, hey, do you happen to have a copy of your transcript? You can say, why, of course, and get his email and quickly send it over. That makes a great impression. And then finally, just practice a lot. There's no science to interviewing. It's definitely an art. So just practice a lot. Have people throw questions at you. Go online, look up questions. Be prepared to answer both traditional and behavioral. And what I mean by that is traditional question would be something like, do you have experience doing this? If so, what kind? Behavioral would be, Tell me about a time when you were working with a group and one of the group members wasn't doing their part. Tell me how you handled that situation. That would be a behavioral question.